Hello everyone, Professor Kurzlook here. I wanted to make a video just talking about some of the recent occurrences that have happened over the past week in the Russia-Ukraine war. So today is September 19th, and I've been trying to put out one of these videos about once a week, just talking about what's been going on with the conflict over the previous week. So we know that we're more than 3.5 years into the full-scale invasion that Russia undertook into Ukraine. And maybe the war isn't front page in the newspaper today. Maybe it's not on the front page of the Washington Post or New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, partly because of other conflicts going on around the world, which are also taking a lot of our attention, as well as a lot of domestic politics, which people are paying a lot of attention to. So maybe the Russia-Ukraine conflict isn't front and center like it was 3 years ago. I remember after the full-scale invasion, the BBC was running 24-hour-a-day updates. Today, it is not nearly as front and center, but as we'll see, there are some occurrences that are making the conflict still, even from a Western perspective, it still matters. We'll see. We'll talk about it. So we know that it continues to evolve across multiple dimensions, the conflict itself. Militarily, we are seeing Russia use drones starting to enter NATO airspace. Economic, we hear President Donald Trump talk about how maybe further sanctions should be involved, diplomatic and domestic. So these all have significant implications not only for Ukraine and Russia, but also, as we're seeing, for Europe, for NATO, and the international order. So let's begin with sanctions, something that if we are paying attention to the conflict, if you're seeking out information on the conflict, you've probably heard discussions about sanctions. So we know this week the European Union introduced its 19th sanctions package against Russia. The package is aimed to erode Moscow's capacity to sustain the war effort. Of course, as we've seen more and more sanctions roll out, these ones are designed to restrict Russia's access to critical sectors, including energy, finance, high technology, and the military-industrial complex. So we've heard debates over, are these sanctions going far enough? Should Europeans have larger sanctions? Should the U.S. have larger sanctions? And so we have seen sanction packages rolled out that are more and more strict, or they target different industries that maybe hadn't been targeted previously. So particularly noteworthy with this newest package is it's undergoing an effort to curtail Russia's so-called shadow fleet. These are vessels that transport oil and circumvent international monitoring. The package also targets financial networks in third countries, which we've heard a lot about. If you pay attention to Donald Trump press conferences, he talks about this. Circumvent third countries that have been instrumental in helping Russia evade previous sanctions. So we hear it talked about a bit. Europe's trying to clamp down on Russia being able to circumvent sanctions. Europe is, sorry if I said that incorrectly, Europe is trying to cut down on Russia's ability to circumvent sanctions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has welcomed these measures, of course, describing them as a potentially decisive step in limiting Russia's capacity to wage war. The enduring challenge, however, lies in its implementation. Sanctions are only as effective as their enforcement, and Moscow has been historically pretty good at getting around these sanctions. And part of it is because countries, for their own benefit, for their own domestic politics and their own local economy, have been more willing to look the other way and to utilize Russia oil at times because it would hurt their economy. So a big debate about how useful sanctions are. Can sanctions be useful? I'm actually writing a piece that I'm trying to get published about how sanctions have why sanctions have come up short. So it's an ongoing academic and public policy debate. So another development we've seen over the past week is Russia continuing to try to recruit foreign fighters into the conflict. When we look at the amount of Russians being killed or injured in the conflict in Ukraine, it is a staggering amount. We've seen that North Koreans have been fighting in Ukraine. We had seen some reports about Venezuelans fighting. Now, Ukrainian intelligence reports that Russians have enlisted more than 20,000 Cuban nationals to serve as mercenaries. These recruits average around 35 years of age and are reportedly compensated at approximately $2,000 US dollars per month to go fight in Ukraine. Yet their presence on the battlefield has come at a pretty enormous cost, as we saw with the North Koreans, as we're seeing with Russian nationals. Estimates suggest that the average Cuban reserve survives only 4 to 5 months of combat before being killed. So this points to extraordinarily high casualty rates and highlights the extent to which Russia is relying on external manpower to offset domestic losses. And we know Vladimir Putin is hesitant for domestic political purposes to bring greater conscriptions to increase the amount of conscripts. When Putin and his inner circle did this in the past, it actually sparked some domestic problems at home. So Putin's been looking for outside power to pull in and use in his war. So this also indicates that Havana, while the Cubans have denied official involvement, the scale of recruitment does raise some difficult questions about how much the Cuban government knows about this going on. Okay, so third thing that we should talk about and think about is there have been some regional security. So again, maybe if you're paying attention to this conflict, you've encountered this, but if you're not, you may still have seen that Estonia reported that 3 Russian MiG-31 aircraft entered its airspace over the island of Vandalu without authorization. The aircraft had disabled their transporters, found no flight plans, and ignored communications from Estonian controllers. In response, Italian F-35 jets, operating as part of NATO's Baltic air policing mission, were scrambled to intercept. Estonia subsequently summoned a Russian diplomat and announced plans to invoke Article 4 of the NATO treaty, which calls for consultations when a member state believes its security is being threatened. While Article 4 does not automatically trigger collective defense like Article 5 does, the incident underscores the persistent risk of escalation through accident or provocation by the Russians. It is a stark reminder here that the conflict has the potential to spill beyond Ukraine's borders into NATO territory. So another critical front is energy and infrastructure, particularly as winter approaches. Russia has conducted repeated strikes on Ukraine's pipelines, storage facilities, power grids. This is the same issue and discussions that we heard approaching last winter about Russians targeting infrastructure in Ukraine, and then how will that impact the Ukrainian winter. So these attacks have left Ukraine struggling to reach its winter gas storage target of roughly 13 billion cubic meters. Kyiv may now need to import up to 2 billion cubic meters of gas at an additional cost of nearly $1 billion. So At the same time, Ukraine has demonstrated its capacity to retaliate, launching drone strikes against Russian energy infrastructure. A recent attack set ablaze a refinery in Russia's Leningrad region, disrupting production and revenues. So these strikes highlight Kyiv's ability to impose costs on Russia, even as it contends with its own vulnerabilities. And speaking of drones, we saw, and I made a video of it, the rather large drone incursion into Polish sovereign territory. The Russians said it was an accident. They denied that it was intentional. But this again sparked alarm in NATO countries and across Europe about, is Russia seeing what they can get away with? Is Russia seeing what how Europe would respond? Would they respond in a collective manner? So those are really the big things that that we should have on our radar as another week concludes in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So we see some economic issues, some diplomatic issues, land territorial-wise, same as has been in previous weeks, just a slow grind on the Eastern Front. So thank you.